Hey.
How come it's still not showing it on here?
Well, there's a delay.
Oh.
It's live though. Look, see?
Cool. Very cool. Very, very, very cool. Well, we hope everyone's been staying sane, doing well during the last 2 months. Thank you so much for tuning in last minute. We know that this was kind of last notice or very late notice thing, last minute thing. A lot's been happening, right? We've been a lot's been happening in the world. We put together an Empire Files episode a couple weeks ago, kind of talking about what the U.S. has been doing under the cover of COVID to exacerbate militarism and war around the world. So please check that out on the Empire Files if you haven't watched it already. It's really incredible. It kind of turned into a mini film with Mike's editing skills and Anna Hadron, Mike's brother, John Prysner's musical score. Very, very cool. Check it out. But really the same thing's been going on, right? I mean, this hasn't stopped. In fact, it's just gotten worse. The bombing of Somalia has continued unabated. The bombing of Afghanistan has continued. The sanctions have only increased. So, yeah. I think it's really interesting that all the hand-wringing over China and Iran on behalf of the establishment media and politicians about their ineptitude, criminal incompetence, at the end of the day, the cases never really exploded in either of those countries. Instead, just as we predicted, they exploded here. So now we're number one, once again, in the worst way possible. American exceptionalism shines its light, right? and this is what we're dealing with here, which is lack of healthcare, lack of affordable housing, and a lack of just UBI for people who are unemployed. 30 million people, 30 million Americans just filed for unemployment. This is after 6 weeks of the quarantine, the pandemic. And don't worry though, it's a great day for the stock market. So I think it said the best day since 1987 today. So you have kind of dueling headlines there that really show how ridiculous the system is, how absurd the notion of just the stock market is in general, and how that just is not a reflection of reality whatsoever. But, you know, as of today, Mike, 64,000 people have died in the U.S. This is over double than that of the next highest, death rate in Italy, which was surpassing the U.S. for quite a while. I know that they were on a forward trajectory, I think, of a week at least in terms of cases and deaths. And so we have just skyrocketed past Italy. We are number one. Over 1 million cases in the U.S., and you have officials in the CDC warning that this could be going on and on for months and months. I mean, another wave, potentially deadlier, coming in late fall and over the winter. So before we move on, I just wanted to say that this emergency podcast, I guess it's not really an emergency podcast, but just this update, kind of a April wrap up of all the COVID politics going on with both political parties and the grassroots organizing happening, will be only available for patrons in 48 hours. Patrons who donate $5 a month and over, and we really appreciate your support. We know it's a time of economic uncertainty for a lot of people, and it's really, really great that the people who are donating to Empire Files have sustained our operations. We know that this is a really difficult time, so thank you so much. If you aren't a donor, please consider becoming one. And if you don't have the economic means, we completely understand. Just check out this podcast before it becomes available for donors only in 48 hours. So Mike, we've been doing quite a lot, right? We've been, I've been doing some art, been catching up on our cats. We binge watched Better Call Saul, which I think is the best show on TV. So, and just obsessively researching news, right? And also trying to be present with the organizing that's taking place with the socialist organizations and grassroots struggles across the country in terms of car protests with the LA Tenants Unit here in LA around Mayor Garcetti's house and LA City Council members' homes to call for rent cancellation and a moratorium on evictions, and also housing of the homelessness. So, Mike, your organization, Party for Socialism and Liberation, has been involved in a lot of this. They've been on the forefront of organizing across the country. Why don't you talk about what just happened on April 25th?
Yeah, sure. And hey, everyone, feel free to keep yelling at me if the audio is not up to par. I'm glad we fixed Abby, but hopefully it doesn't make mine too loud or whatever. So just let me know. But anyways, yeah, so there's been a lot of, it's interesting how spontaneous grassroots organizing adapts to whatever situation we're dealt with. Of course, we've never really dealt with a pandemic before like this. Definitely nothing close to it. And so how you organize and still build a resistance movement when you can't really go outside, be together in person and so forth. One of the exciting things that's happened around the country, we'll talk a little bit about the fight back from the right wing, which has disregarded all, health precautions put out by the CDC and everything. So of course for progressives, for the left wing, we don't want to organize on that basis. But car protests have been an extremely creative and effective way of being able to still be out in the streets, demonstrating at targets we need to be at, while maintaining social distancing and safety for everyone. Everyone's saying closer to the mic, so I'm going to go closer to the mic. So there's been lots of car protests here in Los Angeles. I know this happened all around the country. Here in LA, there have been a lot that we've attended by the LA Tenants Union, which is a great organization, which have been fun because it's gone to Mayor Garcetti's house. Mayor Garcetti lives in, the mayor's mansion. It's not just itself this giant mansion, but it's in a neighborhood of $5 and $10 million houses. So the entire neighborhood is really fancy. It's where the rich are, the people that aren't really worried about the economic impact of the pandemic and so forth. And so you got 100 cars circling Garcetti's house, everyone horns blaring, chanting out the windows. It's quite a scene and quite a little disruptive action. And so those have been effective. The mayor has responded to them by trying to implement this or that. The city council is still not doing enough. But that's been some local things we've been attending. But we were really excited to participate in a national day of action of car protests, which is organized by the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And there's a website, canceltherents.org. And I'll put it in the chat here. But the canceltherents.org movement is basically putting out the demand that workers can't go to work. Their wages are being cut. They're losing hours. They're losing their jobs altogether. 30 million applied for unemployment. So if the government is mandating you can't go to work, you have to social distance, which is requiring these companies to lay people off and shut down and so forth. If the government is telling us that we have to do these things, but then also telling us that we have to pay rent, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, I don't know anyone, who can afford to pay rent for months without having any income. I mean, most of us are living, within the month-to-month situation. That's the reality for most workers in the United States. So it's a simple demand that there should be a national cancellation of rents, which is different from a moratorium. A moratorium on rents means you still have to pay it, but just later. And so all of a sudden when 5 months go by and the restrictions are lifted, you still owe back rent for those 5 months. I mean, who can pay, 5 months of rent in one go? It's just not possible. And so they're calling for a cancellation of rents, a cancellation of mortgages for small businesses and for homeowners as well, no debt accumulation and so forth. And so there were car protests in over 40 cities around the country where people, with this demand, cancel the rents. And it was an interesting counter to the right-wing movements. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But there has been definitely a right-wing protest movement, the Liberate States movement, Liberate Michigan, so forth. And those have gotten a lot of media attention. They've gotten a lot of people. And so it was nice to be able to participate in a similar nationwide day of action, but with an actual working class demand.
And they're definitely not as salacious, right, as the right-wing protests, which is why no corporate national news coverage really paid attention to them. But tons of local news coverage was there on the scene, documenting what was happening with the Cancel the Rent protests. And we encourage you to check out that video that Mike actually edited together. It's really, really great and inspiring. And I think it should really show us that there is a lot happening on the grassroots level that is countering the inaction from the Democratic Party, the gross incompetence from the ruling elite. Nancy Pelosi, who is worth well over $100 million. It's absolutely astounding.
I feel like if you are worth over $100 million, you shouldn't take a paycheck from the taxpayers for being in the Senate.
Unbelievable.
I mean, Pelosi, her Senate salary is like $270,000 a year. If you are 100 millionaire, I don't think you should be able to, why are you taking that fucking salary?
It's unreal. So let's get into the Democrats in a second, but I think that people should be inspired and be instructed by these grassroots protests going on and get involved in them. It's very easy. Join these organizations, link up with these grassroots struggles in your area, and do what you can, because this is a movement that we need to rally around. I mean, this is a moment in time that's a radicalizing moment. That's a revolutionizing moment. And we need to seize that opportunity and really link up with each other despite this social distancing going on.
And there's also a lot of labor organizing happening. I mean, in addition to socialist organizations and grassroots community orgs, the labor movement is in motion also. There have been lots of different wildcat strikes that have gone on. I mean, some of the most exciting organizing that's been happening is workers on their own taking action at their workplaces, but unions are very much a part of that as well. I know, for example, the grocery store workers. I mean, the United Food and Commercial Workers, UFCW, I'm a former member of that union, worker member. They still don't have sick leave. So they're essential workers that people still have to go to work at the grocery store. You still don't have paid sick leave as a worker. And so even if you're getting sick with COVID-19 symptoms, you're disincentivized from calling in sick, because then you're going to sacrifice your paycheck for that.
You mean Whole Foods issuing shirts that just say not all heroes wear capes? That's not enough.
They spent a lot of money on those shirts, not on sick leave pay. It's absurd.
So and be sure to check out if there's any questions coming in from the super chat. So what has Trump's response been, other than telling people to inject disinfectant, give themselves bleach enemas, and bathe in Clorox? Well, I think it's really important to note that he never did a national quarantine measure. And I think this was really on purpose. It's kind of really akin to how savvy and sophisticated he is in terms of playing and pandering to all sides to really seize that swelling of anger, right? And hone in on the populist base that is really upset about the fact that, rightly so, there is drastic numbers of unemployment, no health care, right? You can pay up to $50,000 if you are stricken with COVID and you have to go to the hospital and you don't have health care. All of these things put together have culminated in this reopen the economy kind of wave of protests that Trump has galvanized. He's pandered to his tweets saying, liberate Virginia, liberate all these all these states. It's actually really smart, because he's just able to pass off all of the blame to the governors, the respective governors of these states, and just be like, well, I never implemented a national measure, and I actually agree with the protesters. But at the same time, he can go out there every day and say, well, they should be doing this, they should be doing that. And none of it really matters at the end of the day, because he's Teflon Don. Everything bounces off of him. Nothing ever sticks. Even when he says, that we should inject bleach, it's somehow this big kind of troll, right? It's to trigger libs, and you have his cult like Scott Adams, the Dilbert douchebag, saying, "Oh, you bought it. You got triggered, and you really? You didn't understand the sarcasm there? It's like, what are you talking about here? The hydroxychloroquine, thing. I don't even know if I said that right, but that whole snake oil thing. I mean, all of it is just so dumbed down, but it just works. It works for him, and it works for his base. And the reason why it works the most is because of the Democrats in action, because he's able to utilize the anger, siphon the anger into his base of support and make it a right-wing thing. Make the reopen the economy protests into a working class thing, right? This is the only thing that's happening that's kind of reflected from the establishment, and he's egging them on. And even though they're not, practicing social distancing, they're not wearing masks, and it's just absolutely insane, because it really makes it seem like this is the only movement happening, especially when it's kind of, there's this feedback loop with the corporate media that shows them all, and it's the only thing that a lot of people across the country are seeing happen. And so they're like, yeah, we want to reopen the economy. We're losing our jobs. And it's really unfortunate. It's really, really unfortunate, because the gross incompetence of the Democratic Party is causing this to become popular. The Democrats are doing nothing. As usual, they're utterly and completely failing on responding to this. They're letting all of this fall into the hands of the Trump administration. I mean, just the fact that Biden is nowhere to be seen, the fact that Nancy Pelosi from the onset completely denounced the idea of a UBI, which is something that we know that we need, right? This is something that's very basic in every other Western country. You know, look across Europe, look at Canada. People are getting $2,000 in their bank accounts just by applying. They don't even have all these bizarre restrictions and conditions that we do. I still haven't even gotten my payment, even though I paid taxes last year. What the hell is going on? It's not just because we're waiting for Trump to put his signature on it. I don't know where the money is. It's absolutely insane. But because Biden's nowhere to be found, because Nancy Pelosi, this $100 million worth elite, is just so out of touch. She's doing these interviews with like Hollywood people on these reality shows, showing her double fridge stocked with chocolate ice cream. And when she gives interviews about this, when she's confronted about this by media people, she's just like, she's like just full of empty rhetoric and platitudes that are completely baseless and nonsensical. We're talking about a party that is in control of a branch of government right now. You know, and all they do is cower and concede to the Republicans, and they just give up the fight right at the get-go. And then they're left basically fighting over scraps and figuring out what to do with the rest. And all she does is talk about how, you know, basically small business owners, entrepreneurs, yes, they need some relief. Well, what about the poor, undocumented, working class people? What about the 30 million people who have no jobs, Nancy? What about them? She even just said 2 months into this pandemic, she finally is entertaining the idea, right, that maybe a UBI is something that we ought to consider. Maybe it's something that we ought to consider. These people do not give a shit about us. They are not even doing the most basic, humane things to try to fight for the lives and rights of people in this country. It is grotesque. It is grotesque what Nancy Pelosi is doing, what she's not doing. Chuck Schumer, all of these people. It's sick. It's absolutely sick. So that's what's happening right now. And so of course, Trump's going to be able to siphon all this energy, right? Even though he's up there saying crazy shit every day. This is the same thing that like Tucker Carlson does. You know, he says some things that resonate with people. And this is why these people should never really be given credit, because just like we don't applaud Elizabeth Warren for saying things that appeal to like progressives and leftists, because you know that at the end of the day, her entire strategy is to couch some sort of sensible rhetoric to ultimately steer these people into like corporatism, right? Or the trappings of the Democratic Party. And that's exactly what people like Tucker Carlson do. He's trying to steer this populist anger into the blame of immigrants and China, just like Trump. And this is why people like Steve Bannon remain relevant, remain very, very dangerous, why Trump is so dangerous, and why, you know, Tucker Carlson is ultimately very dangerous, because he's a propagandist for these people. But again, it ultimately falls back on the failings of having a real working class party in this country. So yeah, I just went off on a really big rant, Mike, but why don't you touch upon that before I get into what the latest bailout we've seen happen?
Well, I first of all wanted to comment on the right-wing protests, the Liberate States protests that have been happening, because they're quite significant. I mean, they're large, they're in major cities, they're in more than one city. It's not just one state where they're occurring. For example, today in Michigan, just before we went live, there was a massive demonstration at the state capitol, which seemed for the most part was armed, you know, guys decked out in body armor, full kits, very expensive decked out assault rifles with, you know, probably $10,000 worth of, you know, trinkets and stuff all over it. So it's a real thing. They're a real force. I think that it is true that these right-wing protests are capturing a sector of the working class that's legitimately has economic woes, right? I mean, people who aren't able to go to work, and they're wondering how they're going to, you know, pay their bills, and they want to be able to go back to work. You know, people who lost their jobs and so forth. That, I think, represents a component of the demonstrations, but it's not, I don't even think it's the dominant component of these demonstrations. It's important to recognize that these are like AstroTurf demonstrations. Mm-hmm. Like there is an organization that is behind them. It is the same like billionaires that, you know, supported and created the Tea Party movement. People like the Koch, one of the Koch brothers now, Betsy DeVos, who's like in power. You know, these are the types of right-wing billionaires that are putting money into these types of things happening. And but I think that the largest demographic that these demonstrations are attracting isn't so much workers that want to go back to work, it's business owners who want their workers to go back to work. And that's very important to recognize, that it's people who their businesses have had to shut down and they're not going to have to worry about going into the workplace. They want their workers to be able to go into the workplace. That's definitely a component of these demonstrations. Another component of these demonstrations are just the straight up Alex Jones type anti-Semitic people, like a lot of anti-Semitic signs. It's like a conspiracy by the Jewish elites and so forth. People. Exactly. I mean, they're who think that the pandemic is fake and so forth. I mean, that's definitely a component of them also. And it's also a big component of them is these right-wing armed militia people who have this dream, a fantasy of a civil war in this country, who want any excuse to go out in public with all of their gear and assault rifles. They'd go out to any demonstration where they were welcome just as an excuse to wear all their shit and be on TV and get pictures taken or whatever. I mean, these people are dangerous. We've covered them before, especially with the Chris Hedges interview about the threat of the like fascist right, the militia movement in the United States. And they're a dominant feature at these demonstrations in the states where you can have open carry and stuff. And so it's all these different facets of the right that are coming together for these demonstrations. And so that's why it was important to not let that be the only poll.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
When you allow the right to be the only political poll in the middle of a crisis, it is going to also attract good people to it, people who would be winnable to a real working class program, not a pro-business program, which ultimately those demonstrations, the demand is reopen the economy. Who does that benefit? It benefits big business. So that's not a working class demand. So to be able to stake, and the Democrats, as you went through so well, they haven't staked out a poll to attract people around. It's just, let's try to get something good out of the Republican response. So to be able to have, that's why it's important to be participating in things like Cancel the Rents, canceltherents.org, all these other local organizing happening, because you have to be able to intervene in a crisis like this. And it's also important that the crisis is far from over, unfortunately. We are still in this pandemic period for whoever knows how many more months. The CDC is saying that there will be a bigger and deadlier wave of COVID starting in the winter. And so we may get a break, but we're going to go back into a similar situation. And we have yet to see the real ramifications for the economy. I mean, the 30 million unemployed, I think, is a drop in the bucket to what we're going to be facing. Even government, public workers, there's going to start to be massive furloughs. I mean, there's going to be a real crisis economically, and there's going to have to be a real fight back in particular from organized labor and community support for these things also. So we have to be ready for the long haul here and not let the right wing capture the frustrations. And I completely agree with your saying about Tucker Carlson. Anytime you give credit to like Tucker Carlson for like saying a thing that you might agree with, the whole point of him saying that is to capture what people are feeling and steer you in a reactionary, fascistic, immigrant-hating, warmongering against China and so forth agenda. And so to give credit is to give credit to that whole plan. It's falling for the trick. I mean, unless you agree with ultimately the other things that he's saying. Same thing with Steve Bannon. I mean, these people are skilled propagandists. That's why they're so successful at what they do, right-wing propaganda. And so, yeah, let's not, at the rare chances they say something good, it's followed by some horrifically racist shit. And the whole point is to be like, oh yeah, I agree with that. So then you can fall for the other bullshit that they're peddling.
No, and I totally agree with you about the protests. I didn't mean to say that they are, wholly comprised of working class people. I don't know what the demographics are in terms of economic wealth. I do know that a lot of them are astroturfed. I guess what I was saying more than anything is that when it is the only thing that's being reflected in terms of the anger kind of proliferating in this country and culminating into something that's actually on the ground action, because these socialist grassroots protests that we're talking about before are not being covered nationally for the most part. So I fear that a lot of people, and let's face it, I mean, Trump has a huge base. Not all of these people are business owners, right? A lot of these people, predominantly white, working class people who are getting tricked into the trappings of this right-wing fake populism. And I fear that his base has just grown since the 2016 election. And things like this just make him look better because, again, he's able to pander to all sides of the spectrum, and he's able to take no, like, he doesn't have any responsibility, right? He just says like, oh, well, you know, I support everyone kind of thing. And when there's no accountability for someone who's actually in charge of the country, it gets really dangerous. It's just absolutely bizarre what's going on. I just can't believe it. You know, the fact that we have 63,000 people who have died. I don't know how many people are going to die from this. I know that already, you know, the amount of people who die from the flu, what is it, 40,000 in the entire year. This was 40,000 in 1 month here. And especially if you're saying there's a second wave that could be deadlier and more serious. And the fact that Trump is just absolved from accountability from that. And everything's deflected onto China. I mean, how babyish are Americans? Seriously, that we cannot criticize our own government and our own system, that we have to deflect everything onto a foreign country. It's sick. It's jingoism at its worst. And I just don't get it because it's so obvious. It's plain as day that our government is responsible for why there's a huge death toll here. Like why we have these measures in place.
It's funny because earlier we were watching these videos, like TikToks from China of people in China making fun of the United States for how horribly we've managed the crisis. It's like people being like, oh, capitalist America, it's so fucking great. You have the record number of COVID, you know, you can't contain it. You don't have enough testing kits, whatever. I mean, we're failing massively on the world stage in comparison to countries that don't really have much. I mean, the fact that, you know, you just mentioned that 63,000 people in the United States have died from COVID. That number has grown dramatically in the past 2 weeks. The first recorded death of COVID in the United States was February 6th. So between February 6th and April 15th, 30,000 people in the United States died of COVID. That's a pretty great stretch. February, March, you know, and then between April 15th and today, an additional 33,000 people died. So that's, you know, it more than doubled in just 2 weeks what had I done in 2 months before. You know, a lot of people like to argue that this isn't really a problem. It's like, oh, the death rate is only 1%. That's blowing it out of proportion. Well, if that's true, that's 10 times more than the flu, and that's pretty bad. I mean, that's a pretty high death rate. You know, even I'm sure a lot of people even watching know someone who's died of COVID-19. I mean, the first person that Abby and I knew just died of what seems to have been COVID-19. Our friend Ken Rowe, a figure in the Korean community here in Los Angeles, we just saw him a few months ago at a banquet with the pro-reunification movement for Korea here in LA. And the guy was in perfect health, making everyone laugh. It was a great night with him. And he just passed away just on the April 25th, I believe. So it's a real thing. To say it's not a real problem is absurd. And, you know, even 1% of, you know, the amount of people that are going to get it, that's a pretty high number.
And let's talk really quickly about the $2 trillion quote unquote bailout, right? The coronavirus rescue package that was approved near unanimously. Matt Taibbi on Rolling Stone wrote a great breakdown of just how much of a scam this really was. Of course, we've talked before, and I think this has been belabored quite a bit about who got the bailout, you know, giant, massive corporations, including candy dynasties, airliners, cruise liners, all of that. But what I thought was really interesting out of this article that Matt Taibbi wrote was that Mitch McConnell kind of tacked on a really high set of tax breaks, which was stuck in last minute. You know, that this always happens. All this pork is just added, completely just not dissented against by the Democrats who voted for this, because it's all just couched in the fact that, oh, well, you know, we need the emergency relief for workers, the relief that I and I'm sure millions of other people have not seen and probably will never see. The one-time payment, right? Sometime in May, sometime in the next couple of months, we'll get that one-time payment that will pay half of our rent, maybe a quarter of the groceries that we spend every month. So anyway, this CARES Act that was put forward by Mitch McConnell, the Joint Committee on Taxation found that 80% of the benefit of the bill went to just 43,000 taxpayers earning over $1 million a year.
Say that again.
Okay. This analysis found that 80% of the benefit of this bill went to just 43,000 taxpayers who earn over $1 million a year. The average tax break for those 43,000 individuals was $1.6 million from this bill, which is really interesting when you consider the loudness and the uproar over the bill was that measly $1,200 payment to average Americans. You know, everyone was like, oh my God, this is amazing. That's what the bill was really for. Providing a huge tax break for people earning over $1 million. That's what this bill was for. It was nothing about the $1,200 a month, which is absolutely nothing. What does Nancy Pelosi say in response? Don't worry, guys. The next bill called CARES 2 is coming sometime in May, and God knows what that's going to comprise of. Definitely not anything substantial. You know, again, going back to the empty rhetoric and these nonsensical platitudes. I mean, every time she talks about stuff like this on the news, she's just like, this crisis really shows you like the dignity and what America's really about. I mean, it's so like Joe Biden-esque. It just says nothing. You're addressing nothing, right? The only person that I even see talking about rent cancellation is like Ilhan Omar. I mean, this is one person out of hundreds of right-wing politicians in this kleptocracy that we live in. And it's just absolutely absurd.
Yeah, I mean, to that point about the detachedness of Pelosi, you know, and as you mentioned, she's worth over $100 million, which is like, I mean, how can you even imagine having that much money? It's like hard to even imagine what your life would be like if you had that much wealth. But, you know, that video with the ice cream, the notorious now ice cream video that you mentioned. I mean, I think an interesting thing about that is because a lot of people saw that and, you know, she's standing in front of these 2 Sub-Zero fridges, like side by side. And I was just thinking, I was like, I've never actually been in a house where I've seen 2 refrigerators side by side like that.
Catering company.
Most Americans, like, and anyone could put in the chat, if anyone has ever seen been in, it's not that workers like can't afford that. We've never even seen it. Working class people in the United States didn't even know that was like a thing that like people did, rich people did
double freezer
in their houses. And so it's detached on another level. It's not detached on like, oh yeah, I've seen that before. I wish I could afford it, but I can't. It's like, wait, you have like rich people have this?
Yeah, exactly. Was there anything on the super chat that we should address?
Just a lot of people saying thank you.
Oh my gosh. What? Oh, come on. That's not true at all. You know, one thing that's really kind of hit home to me is the post office. I mean, this is something that, again, like, it's a revered institution. Polls taken, you know, people notoriously hate the government for good reason, but people love the post office for also good reason, because it's like rates are 3 times as expensive if you go somewhere like UPS, FedEx. The post office is a national treasure. In fact, it's written up in the Constitution as the postal clause, and it's not funded by tax dollars. It's funded by stamps. So it isn't even like siphoning off of whatever people think it is in terms of like a burden for the government. And it functions really, really well. I was really excited about the prospect of Bernie winning and possibly expanding the post office to become banks and have expanded resources like that. So it's just so devastating to me as someone who ships out art frequently. We run a store, empirefiles.store. You guys can check out where we ship out shirts and DVDs of our film Gaza Fights for Freedom. And it's absolutely devastating already, the prices that we need to charge for international shipping. And the only reason that we need to charge such a exorbitant amount for international shipping is because the Republicans have already purposefully gutted the post office. This was 15 years ago during the Bush administration. The Republican-led Congress passed an act called the Postal Accountability Enhancement Act, which mandated the most ridiculous thing that's ever been mandated for any business, like in the history of this country. They mandated the post office pay preemptively 75 years of health care benefits for future employees. Like, put a fund together to fund future employees' healthcare benefits for 75 years. So people who weren't even going to be born until like 2050. Can you imagine if this was done for any other corporation in the entire country? It would be called Marxist, draconian, communist measures that are just beyond belief, right? Well, this was done on purpose to gut the post office so they could be bankrupt. So of course, during this pandemic, when we need the post office the most, they are the ones delivering the packages to our door. We need to support the workers there. We need to help them survive. Trump has actually threatened to veto any sort of bailout relief if it includes any amount of money for bailing out the post office whatsoever. And he even said, okay, you want to fix the post office, just triple your rates. Just triple your rates. That's what he actually told them.
They want that
it's
to
comically insane.
Because the goal of that is for then people to be like, oh my God, the post office is charging so much. This sucks. And get mad at them and then want to use other services like FedEx and UPS and then start ultimately make it fail. I mean, it's the same strategy as I'm seeing with the Veterans Administration, with the, because I'm in the VA healthcare system. And everyone knows the VA healthcare system has a bad rap and it's doing badly, whatever. It's because the Republicans and Democrats too intentionally understaff it, intentionally underfund it. And then when it's not working, they're like, oh my God, we have to privatize this. You can't, you're not successful. So the same thing is happening in the post office. And I think the biggest way you can, there's going to be, of course, labor actions when you can support them, but use the post office instead of the other things.
Yes, please.
So like if you go to empirefiles.store, order stuff from us, we only use the post office. I mean, it sucks that like international shipping is like double for the post office what it is for these private things now because of this because that was pushed upon them by the Republicans. It's, it's
I
like
think
the most
compared to other
sinister
countries.
thing
I don't
to
know
go
if it's
after.
actually compared to private companies, but yeah, definitely compared to like Europe and stuff. They're just like, why are you charging so much for this? Because they don't have that problem there. But go on.
No, I was just going to say, it's like how much more sinister can you get going after the post office, postal workers?
Poor little post office. Poor little post office just trying to make trying to make ends meet. So yeah, if you can support the post office, buy stamps. That's really the only way that they're funded. We cannot really depend on anything that the government's going to do for them. And again, going back to Nancy Pelosi and these Democratic leaders, it's like, what the fuck are you doing to try to fight for this institution, this sacred institution? Like, are you even doing anything at all? Good God. So yeah, and it's just amazing. It's like, again, people aren't upset that Trump is doing this. I mean, that the post office could literally fall under his administration. It would be a huge disaster. But no one cares. Again, everything bounces off of him. Everything's deflected on other people.
Which again is one of like, it's not even so much that we would lose the service of the post office, which would be terrible, but that is like one of the few really excellent source of working class jobs where you're going to have benefits, you're going to have a retirement. I mean, it's funny because everyone knows that young people join the military because it's one of the only jobs in the United States where you can get free healthcare, guaranteed housing, you have job protection, job security. You're not going to randomly get laid off one day. You're going to have a livable wage. And that's why people go in the military. But, 50 years ago in the United States, 60 years ago, that was every job. Every job had to have guaranteed healthcare, guaranteed retirement, guaranteed living wage. It was just the way that the American economy had to work to be able to stave off a revolution. And so every single job had those protections. And then over time, those protections and those guarantees just got withered away. And the military was one of the only places left that still had them. And the post office is one of the only places left that still has them. So it would just be devastating for those workers. I mean, I know people who worked at the post office for most of their lives and was able to retire off it. It's just like, it's so important that we protect what is left of dignified working class jobs.
All right. 600,000 people are employed in the post office right now. There's been huge postal worker-led strikes in the past, and I just hope that we see similar things happen now. I mean, again, this is a radicalizing moment that I really hope we can see a major labor struggle resurrected. But you're right, Mike. I just saw someone post the other day, like FDR's Economic Bill of Rights. I mean, it's absolutely astounding. It's like exactly what Bernie's platform was calling for. And to think that this was something that was in place 100 years ago and it's just been stripped down systematically by the system. And now that's just commonplace, right? That these things are seen as radical and too much, right? We don't deserve these things. They're crazy concepts. No, this is actually fundamental concepts that comprise the social fabric of our country 100 years ago.
And it also is a lesson of whether or not capitalism can work for the people of this country. I mean, FDR was a shitty guy. He was bad all around, but he was the guy that was supposed to come in and save capitalism from a mass labor and socialist movement, which was being quite successful at shutting down the country in response to the Great Depression. And so they have this guy come in who says, okay, well, capitalism can work. It can be reformed. Because a lot of people are saying, let's overthrow capitalism. Other countries in the world had done it by that time, and it was looking a lot better than it was in the United States. And there was this compromise to say, well, let's not overthrow capitalism. Let's implement these sweeping social programs. And so they did that. And for a while, it worked for a segment of the population, for white workers, not for anyone else. But but then it of course eroded. Any gain under capitalism immediately becomes under attack by those who hold all the power. And inevitably it'll be whittled down until what we have today, which is basically none of those things. And then we're expected to be excited about maybe having those things happen again. And of course they didn't. That was defeated also. But even if those things were won under Bernie, after the Bernie administration was over and we had even if he implemented all of these sweeping things, they would immediately start to be whittled away again. And so there's no more arguing about whether or not we can fix these things under capitalism. We can't.
Yeah, so why don't we just briefly talk about Bernie dropping out during the midst of this pandemic and being left with Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee, Mike. Before you comment on this, I mean, I was disappointed, frankly. I thought that it was really important for Bernie to stay in the race, especially given what we are going through. This is an unprecedented moment. His platform seemed urgent, especially healthcare being such a primary focus, and the fact that Joe Biden had already capitulated and said he would veto Medicare for all. I just felt like rhetorically, symbolically, to have Bernie still in the race, putting himself as a relevant figure, because of course you are more relevant when you are still running as a candidate. I was disappointed, and it was just kind of devastating to have Biden be the presumptive nominee in the middle of this shutdown. You know, it just felt really gross. And so here we are.
Yeah. I mean, I obviously think the pandemic played a role in all that. Wisconsin, where Biden was saying it's totally safe to go out and vote. Go out and vote, please. We know that at least 53 people contracted COVID because they went to the polls and contracted them at the polls. And that since Election Day, when symptoms start to show up and people start to go get tested a week and a half afterwards, you see a spike in COVID cases in Wisconsin, a week, 10 days, 14 days after the election. So it had an impact. And I think that maybe situation would be different if it wasn't like life-threatening to be able to go out, and Biden and the Democratic Party establishment was being so disgusting in the way that they were conducting the election. But it was a big, demoralizing hit when especially coming from like the first all the states before Super Tuesday. It seemed sure that Bernie was going to win the primary. I think there's a couple lessons from it that are important for us. And one is that, we're always told that in this democracy, the way we get change is putting faith in the elections. If you want things to change, you got to vote. You got to get involved in politics. You got to campaign for people that you like. And Bernie was like the best case scenario for that situation. For progressive people who want to change society, because no other candidate wants to change society, right? Republicans, the rest of the Democratic field, none of them wanted to change society at all. They just wanted to be the one that was in charge of the same society that they were taking over being in charge of. Bernie's campaign wanted to change society in a profound way. So even when you have a candidate who's like the most liked politician in the country, the most popular politician in the country, who has an actual record of being genuine, of being sincere, of being true to his beliefs, for his entire life, who has an unprecedented grassroots volunteer movement, an unprecedented grassroots fundraising movement. I mean, that is the best case scenario. He's got no dirt on him, nothing bad he could drive from his past. The best case scenario situation for what they've always told us how we can have change, even with that best case scenario, couldn't defeat the Democratic Party machine. And so I think that's just a sign that it's, elections are an arena of struggle, but they're just one, and they're not the most important arena of struggle.
No.
Change, progressive reforms have been won under Republican administrations because of the power of the movement at that time. And so that was an important lesson for people. I think that young people got that lesson. Our generation of people see that very clearly. And I'm encouraged because the reason that Bernie had this unprecedented grassroots movement, if Bernie would have ran in 2008 or 2004, that movement wouldn't have been there. The movement around Bernie was the way it was and was so vibrant and energetic and successful at what it did is because it was all of the stuff under the surface that is there anyway and is going to continue to grow. The stuff that bubbled to the surface under Occupy, and so forth. And so because of the conditions of growing inequality and growing hardship, that's not going to go away. And we've even seen that so far with, Bernie moving on to endorsing Biden and all that stuff. All of that anger that was backing him is still there, and there's just going to be another outlet for it. And that next outlet for it should not be rallying around the next candidate that we work our ass off to try to get into office. That outlet for it should be something different that disrupts business as usual.
I couldn't agree more with you. And I think that, of course, a lot of things could have been done differently. I was disappointed with some things, some aspects of the campaign. I felt like he should have gone harder against Biden. But I think at the end of the day, none of that would have changed the outcome, as you're saying. I mean, the power of the Democratic Party machine was just too strong. And the centralization and consolidation of the establishment candidates engineered from the top was something that couldn't be reckoned with. You didn't see that same pull from the quote-unquote anti-establishment progressive side. I mean, look at Warren staying in audaciously past Super Tuesday. Look at Tulsi Gabbard dropping out endorsing Joe Biden. Look at Andrew Yang dropping out endorsing Joe Biden. Even Tom Steyer, who was essentially a shadow of Bernie, not endorsing him. So it was completely bizarre how it played out, but also not bizarre at all, right? This is exactly how politics works. And it was just kind of sad. It was sad to see the wheels in motion, the machine kicked into gear, and really come down full force to prevent Bernie from moving forward. I think that the argument wasn't made enough that, like Michael Moore always says, when we go with the safe centrist candidate, that's when we lose. The argument was always painted that Bernie was too radical, that democratic socialism was too radical, and no one would ever buy it. Well, no, it's the opposite. When we go with someone like Gore, like Kerry, right? That's when we lose, like a Hillary, like a Biden. That's the bad choice. That's when the country will not come out. That's when people will not be inspired because there is no change. It's just status quoism. Just like Biden says, he doesn't want to change anything. He wants to go to return to normalcy. I know a lot of Sanders' campaign staff has been pretty vocal about wanting him to go, for the jugular more. But again, at the end of the day, would that have mattered? Would that have changed the outcome? I don't think so, because I think that the Democratic Party is too strong. It's already so rigged and ensconced in corporatism that, let's say, best case scenario, like you said, I mean, this unprecedented crowd game, donor base, all this stuff, volunteer base, where Biden has none, right? Biden's whole strategy was to not campaign. He had no offices, he had no volunteers, and he still doesn't. But even if Bernie won, think about the crazy limitations that would have happened even within his own party. I mean, there's like 4 progressives in Congress. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of like right-wing centrists, if you even want to call them centrists. I think they're right-wingers, and you have like way more extreme right-wingers. They would have just been trying to block everything that happened. I don't even see what could have happened possibly under this kind of like top-down stuff. I mean, he could have passed a bunch of executive orders like Trump did. But again, like being blockaded by your own party is something that I think would have been really difficult to overcome. So again, I mean, what does this tell us about electoral politics? What does this tell us about our desire to throw all of our political energy behind them? I mean, it shows us that it's something that's ineffective, largely. I mean, we live in a right-wing kleptocracy. This is not a democracy at all. It hasn't been for some time. And I think that this is just kind of a way to siphon people's energy, to make people demoralized, to make people isolated every 4 years, right? When we don't really win any gains and when we lose the minuscule gains that we have. It's just really demoralizing, and it makes people feel like they have to either buy into the Democratic Party or do nothing at all, just kind of retreat back into their holes. That's not where we should be investing our energy in. We should be investing our energy into massive struggles, grassroots movements that are active every single day. Instead of just plugging in a vote every 2 to 4 years, you need to be engaged every single day in the anti-war movement, in the labor struggle. Because again, as Mike said, we can win these gains no matter who's on top, but it has to come from us. It has to come from millions of people generating that pressure from the bottom. And that's why, sadly, I think movements, like the Justice Democrats and like ultimately the Bernie campaign, I don't want to say that necessarily because it really was the millions of people who were on the ground spreading the ideas, which I think were really monumental and really profound. But I think that ultimately rallying behind a figurehead who is a politician trying to win a democratic election is going to fail ultimately. And even though we see a handful of progressives in Congress, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, AOC, they are 3 people out of a sea of right wingers. And what can they actually do? It almost provides legitimacy for the entire system as a whole. It makes people think that, okay, if we just did this in our district, if we just put all of our money and energy and resources and organizing efforts into electing someone like that here, then we can do something. I think that how many times do we have to go through this cycle to realize that's not where we need to be investing in? Of course, you can vote for the most progressive person who's on the ballot. That's the least. That's literally the least we can do. Yeah. But we have to expand our minds here. And I think that I'm finally seeing it. I mean, I'm not seeing, I feel like last election cycle, and we go through this every election cycle, right? We get blackmailed and bullied, and all the leftists are expected to line up and vote for the establishment Democrat. But I see things playing out differently this time. And I think you're right that this is just the latest iteration of that dissent that we saw fomenting under Occupy, and now it happened at the Bernie campaign. And where is it going to go next? And I'm encouraged by that, and I think that should be something that's a source of optimism from us, for the people who were invested in this campaign and building a better future. Yeah, and I agree that I think that the belief that all our energies, like the fact that progressivism and the left and progressive ideas are stronger right now, it gives people the impulse to think, well, now we should run candidates and try to get them elected on this basis. I think that everyone who, the Bernie Sanders campaign was a massive victory. Everyone who campaigned for Bernie, who did outreach for Bernie, it doesn't matter if he won or lost, you helped popularize the ideas of socialism, of Medicare for all, all of these important things. That's not going to go away. Every door you knocked on, every phone call you made, you've introduced people to a program that is important and is going to be enduring, and did make an impact on helping shift consciousness in the United States. But I think it's putting the cart before the horse to say the way that we're going to actually accomplish those things in this country on a large scale is getting progressives elected all over the country into Congress in a massive way. And then there's going to be this progressive wave of change in this country. It's the opposite. It's when the grassroots is strong, when there is a grassroots, a labor, a progressive and radical and socialist movement in this country that is widely popular, that is known, that is shutting things down, that's when it'll be easy to get people elected into these positions. But under the current situation of, especially within the Democratic Party isn't an active organization. The Democratic Party is a voter turnout machine. Its job is to bring people to the polls and tell them to vote for the Democrat that they say to vote for. And it's a huge machine. You have people like Obama who played a role in getting Biden elected behind the scenes. And so that's what you're up against. And so to put your energies into the grassroots, if you want to see progressives in office, that's like kind of the first step. It's great that people like AOC and Rashida and Ilhan Omar were able to get in and to be this dissenting voice within, but those were very particular circumstances and very particular communities where they had grassroots support and so forth. That's really not that speaks to the attempt to get progressives elected and a lot of money being put in, and they don't. It just shows that the limitations of that. But I do want to say that I'm also encouraged because a lot of people took the Bernie loss as like the left is weak in this country and it was a huge defeat for the left and all of that. Mm-hmm. But I've seen the opposite. I mean, the fact that Bernie was able to get that many votes and compete and almost look like he was going to win, that's like crazy. I mean, I couldn't have imagined that happening 10 years ago. And I've been in a socialist party since 2006. Even through almost 10 years of that, you couldn't really talk to people about socialism. We have not seen a decline in the left. We have seen a bigger surge than we've ever seen before. The number of membership applications into the PSL since Super Tuesday is probably more than we've ever gotten in like years-long periods put together. The DSA, of course, I mean, being the most identifiable socialist organization in the country, thousands and thousands of people going to join the organization. And so it may seem like, oh, the left is weak because we couldn't get Bernie elected, but in my entire experience, have never seen the left be so strong and the ideas be so popular. I mean, we were saying earlier about how people voted for Biden even though they supported Medicare for all. I mean, the ideas have become popular ideas. Right. When you isolate the ideas away from the politicians, people overwhelmingly support Bernie's agenda. It's just that the case wasn't made enough. You can argue that the corporate media was, of course, he was on the defense all the time. The free media advertising given to Biden in general, just like Hillary, just completely, fawning coverage that never really was critical of his positions. The fact that he wanted to veto Medicare for all, the fact that he would cut your Social Security. Totally. But I think it's important to pull away from, this demoralizing moment and feeling the fatigue of like, okay, Bernie didn't get elected and now Bernie's telling us to vote for Joe Biden, right? And now Bernie's actually coming out and saying donate to the Democratic Party. That's when we move on from him, right? We move on from him and we move forward with the millions of people who were energizing for those ideas and for that agenda. Because it's not about any one person, it's about carrying on the message. And we just have to do that. We have to march forward and march on and not let that kind of bring us down. And of course I disagree with that.
And the first opportunity
of course
to
you
do
shouldn't
that
do that.
It's tomorrow. Tomorrow's May Day. It's International Workers' Day. There is demonstrations, car caravans and stuff all over the country. So wherever you are, try to find what May Day action is near you, because those will be important. But Abby, now that Biden is the nominee, do you think that's ironic at all? I mean, considering the rest of the field being, we're the new face of the Democratic Party, we're more progressive, we're younger, we're more diverse, and then it ends up with Biden, who's arguably the most right wing of the entire Democratic Party field, and all that.
Yeah, I mean, who are you going to vote for? The old, rich, alleged rapist, or Joe Biden? Because both of them are, right? So this is, or Donald Trump. That was the joke. I fucked it up. But basically both of them are losing their mental faculties. They're old, out of touch, rich people, right? And they're also alleged rapists. And I completely believe Tara Reid, and we're going to get into her story in a second. But that's our choices. Someone who was one of the most right-wing candidates next to Amy Klobuchar. At least every other candidate running had to kind of pretend like they were adopting some of Bernie's rhetoric and siphon that away from him and be like, yeah, Bernie, we've seen him before in 2016, but I'm like the female version. I'm, the person of color
Bernie
who's
Light.
Offering this. Bernie Light.
Everyone was Bernie Light.
But Joe Biden was just unapologetically terrible the whole time.
He's I hate everything Bernie stands for. We can't have any of that.
And it really is revealed in the polls about how enthusiastic are Biden supporters. Not much, right? I think they're
enthusiastic about beating Bernie.
Yeah, right. They were enthusiastic about beating Bernie. But I think there's the lowest amount of enthusiasm in the last 20 years among the Democratic Party for their candidate. Really what it comes down to, as it does in every election cycle, and I remember this from John Kerry too, and this probably happened before Kerry as well, but it always comes down with a gun to your head about SCOTUS. It's not even about Joe Biden anymore, right? It's just about what's going to happen when Ruth Bader Ginsburg leaves. And are you going to want Trump to appoint a fucking third Supreme Court nominee? Can you imagine that that's happened already? It's unbelievable. I saw someone make the case that, yeah, okay, so let's just say that Biden does win. What's to say that he's going to be able to elect someone progressive? First of all, he's not progressive, right? Even Obama capitulated to the right wing and Mitch McConnell and tried to elect just a moderate. And even he couldn't do that. He was blocked from doing that. And Biden, he fucking voted to confirm Antonin Scalia. So why, all of this coming down to SCOTUS and a gun to your head? Do you want to preserve Roe v. Wade or don't you? What on earth makes you think that would even work?
And all the people that cared about progressive Supreme Court nominees only started caring about it as soon as Biden beat Bernie. When Bernie was running and who was guaranteed to put in the most progressive Supreme Court nominees, and in fact even rotate off using congressional loophole or constitutional loophole to rotate off right-wing members of the Supreme Court into slower appeals courts. No one cared about Supreme Court nominees then. It was only once Biden was the nominee that all of a sudden they were like, well, what about the Supreme Court?
And what about the other courts? It's not just about the Supreme Court. This is all judges in all of these federal courts across the country that Trump has appointed record numbers of, that people like Amy Klobuchar and other generic Democrats have voted to confirm. They have voted to confirm these people. It's not just about the Supreme Court. So I can't handle this. This is emotional blackmail. I'm not going to buy it. If you live in a swing state and you want to vote for Biden just for the Supreme Court vote, be my guest. More power to you. But I do not think that this is a strategy that works. And I don't think that, making people feel like shit because they don't want to endorse a rapist, war criminal person who literally has dementia, who we have no idea what he would do in power. He literally has said that he wants to appoint potentially a Republican for his vice presidential candidate and for his administration. Can you imagine a Republican president saying the same about Democrats? And actually it would make more sense if they did, because Democrats are right wingers anyway. So it's like, yeah, why not have a token Democrat in my administration to pretend like I'm bipartisan? Joe Biden is just openly saying that. He was saying that for months. So I just can't believe that here we are again in 2020 after going through the last 20 years of it coming down to Roe v. Wade. You look at Joe Biden's record on Roe v. Wade, he even said it went too far. How do we even know he would support it? Like, how do we even know that the judge he picks would support it, even if he was able to get past the Republicans by appointing who he wanted to? So I think it's important to remember what happened under Obama. Even when he gave everything up, he still wasn't able to get a judge in. And that's the only reason we were told to vote for him the second term. I didn't vote for him. But yeah, I think a lot of people did, because they were like, well, we want to preserve Roe v. Wade. I mean, how insane is this? That this is what our system has come down to. The greatest democracy in the world.
And it's important to remember that when people are shaming the left and progressives into voting for Biden and saying, if you don't, you're a horrible person or whatever, there's a reason that they're focusing on you. You're not going to determine the election. If every person who supported Bernie votes for Biden, it's not going to be the decisive factor in whether or not Biden wins. The decisive factor in whether or not Biden wins is if new voters, the over 120 million people in this country who do not vote, if a section of them are inspired to go out and vote for Biden. And so it just doesn't matter. The reason they're focusing on you is because of the politics, because they hate your politics. They want you to give up your ideals. They want you to compromise your principles. When if they were actually concerned with getting Biden elected, they would turn their energies towards the people that could be reached. I mean, I'm not going to be reached to vote for Biden. Why are you wasting your time attacking me? Go to the people that you can win over, the working class people who you might be able to inspire to go out to the polls. And they're just hypocrites. I mean, the thing about Bernie people who were like telling other people to vote for Bernie, they weren't just doing it online. They were going to phone banking sessions. They were going door knocking. But all these Biden people now who are trying to shame you into voting for Biden, have they made any phone calls? Have they knocked on any doors? If they really cared about electing him, instead of harassing you, they should be spending their time trying to get voters that they can actually reach.
Yeah, no, they just want to lecture and vote shame Bernie supporters. You never hear them talk about half of the eligible voters in this country who don't vote. They never talk about more, they want to blame Jill Stein for the 2016 election, but they never talk about how more people actually went to the polls, voted down the line, and left president blank. Why is that?
Say that again.
Yeah, so actually more people in a lot of these key swing states, more people than even voted for Jill Stein went to the polls, voted down the line for all these other positions, but left the presidential field blank because they were disgusted with the options of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Why don't we talk about that? Why don't we talk about the non-voters in this country? You never hear them focus on that. All they do is blame the left, hand-wring, Jill Stein, Green Party, socialists. It's insane. I mean, these holier-than-thou liberals and establishment figures will never do what you're saying, Mike. They will never actually put the effort in to reach the people who are non-voters. Why? Because those people are disgusted by them. Those people have unplugged from the political arena because they've been abandoned, because they don't buy into the Democratic Party. So they just see people who are engaged, leftists and people like that who really care, right? And who are active and involved in all of these struggles. And they say, well, you need to vote for our guy because he's better than this guy. It's absolutely insane. Do not waste your vote on the Democratic Party. I mean, this blank check that we give to the Democrats every 4 years is what moves the country more right wing. It happens every single election cycle. You're giving them a blank check and just unabated support. You're just like, here's my support. I'm checking the box to say, I believe in your agenda. There's no dissent. There's no caveat that says, by the way, I really fucking hate you, but I just want this and this. I think that we need to put all of our energy moving forward into Occupy style agitation campaigns, throwing our bodies into the gears of the machine, getting involved in these massive labor struggles, anti-war movements, general strikes, shutting down business as usual, supporting workers on the front lines who are taking the initiative in these movements, because the time to organize outside of the system is right now. It has never been more urgent, especially during this pandemic, with America leading the way in terms of deaths ineptitude, criminal incompetence. And I think that leading the millions of young people who have rejected status quo politics away from that obsession with the electoral arena and into grassroots organizing has never been more important. And we need to fight. We need to fight for the policies that we deserve. And that's what we need to do. Because I think that this whole thing and the pandemic and the election has really just revealed the flaws of the electoral arena. And it's also just revealed how capitalism cannot function, right? And no matter what we do to try to fix the system, we can't, right? It's just not going to work. It's not sustainable. So I'm really excited that there are other options that you can, you don't have to vote for Biden, especially being in California. We have Gloria La Riva, Leonard Peltier running as socialist candidates for the PSL. I mean, he's a political prisoner who's been in jail, I don't know, for like 50 years now. Really crazy story. You should check him out. But he's running as her vice presidential candidate, and she's just a really incredible organizer who's been really active on the movement, really on point about anti-imperialism, which is obviously first and foremost what we care about. And that's why we support their candidacy, and we encourage people to check them out, get involved, and look at their platform at larivapeltier2020.org.
Yeah. I guess...
Why don't you talk really quickly about like the Green Party / PSL?
Oh, yeah. I guess a lot of people ask, why Gloria La Riva, not the Green Party ticket. Howie Hawkins, I guess, running for the Green Party nomination, doesn't have it yet. There's rumblings that Jesse Ventura has swooped in and might run for the Green Party nomination as well. But the PSL isn't running the election to win the election, and we're not trying to be competitive with the Green Party. So if you want to vote for the Green Party, vote for the Green Party. The PSL is only going to be on the ballot in around 10 states anyway, where the Green Party is going to be on the ballot in all 50 states. So if you're in a state where you can support the PSL, you have the opportunity to do that. But I think the difference in the campaigns is, the Green Party is an electoral party. I mean, they're running to be able to be a force in elections that's able to run candidates and win, to make the Green Party an alternative to the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Whereas the PSL, the only reason that we run in elections, we run in local offices, we run for president every election. We're not trying to win the elections, any of them, even the local offices. We're just know that people pay attention to elections when elections are happening, and we want to reach working class people wherever they are with a radical program. So the goal of the PSL campaign is to inform people about socialism and help people know about the organization so people join and become active in the things that actually matter, which is grassroots struggle.
Well said. Let's close it out with Tara Reade. This is pretty explosive allegations that came out against Joe Biden right when Bernie dropped out, right when Biden was the front runner. All of these, the allegations were already there, let's be clear, but we came out, with the Katie Halper show where Tara Reade really detailed the harrowing things that Joe Biden did to her. He raped her, right? And it was really, really awful. People should check out the interview. I'm not going to go over the details there. But since then, it's been really curious to see how people have reacted. Of course, the hypocrisy with the Me Too movement and the corporate media just not addressing it. I think even asking Bernie about it instead of Biden himself. Biden's done dozens of interviews, never been asked about it. But I completely believe Tara Reade. I did from the beginning because I heard her testimony and I just automatically understood it to be true based on her emotional recounting and detailing of what happened. But it's a no-brainer now. I mean, if you don't believe it now, there's something wrong with you, because so many people have come out and corroborated the story, including a neighbor of hers back in 1993 who is a Joe Biden supporter, right? This woman's a Joe Biden supporter. Explosive story in the Business Insider.
And Tara Reade was an Elizabeth Warren supporter. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not like a Trump person or like a Bernie bro or whatever. I mean, it's coming from, the liberal wing.
Yeah, it's not like the Al Franken thing where that was just like, I mean, this is so much worse and so much crazier. And the fact that people are like, well, it's not as bad as Trump. I mean, it's unreal. It's unreal. So yeah, just check out the Business Insider article about Tara Reade's neighbor who said, quote, "This happened. And I know it happened because I remember talking about it." Linda Lacasse said, who lived next door to Reade in the mid-90s. Lacasse told Insider that in 1995 or 1996, Reed told her she had been sexually assaulted by Biden. Quote, I remember her saying, here was this person that she was working for and she idolized him. And he put her up against a wall and he put his hand up her skirt and put his fingers inside of her. She was assaulted and she really didn't feel like there was anything she could do. Do you need any more information to know that this story is true? But all of it's being presented by corporate media when they do touch upon it as Trump allies. Have you noticed that? Like Trump allies are trying to attack Joe Biden, and you have people like Stacey Abrams embarrassingly doing these mental gymnastics to apologize and say, like, I believe Biden. And it's like, why? Why do you believe Biden? I thought our whole thing was believing women whose stories are corroborated with evidence. So that's what's happening right now. It's disgusting. It's crazy. So again, here's what our choices are, right? An old, rich, alleged rapist losing their mental faculties, or Donald Trump, because that's the two choices that we have. And sadly, Trump is already doing hella good shit, putting forward really cutting campaign ads, calling out Joe Biden's dementia and stuff, calling out what Nancy Pelosi's doing. And these things just make the case for why I think he is going to crush Biden, and why there's really no chance for Biden to win. I just don't see it happening. And I think Trump is stronger than ever. And it's just so devastating that this is where we're at, because Trump is a horrible, nightmarish person. And I just shudder to think what he will do with the second term, what power he will consolidate further. It's very, very frightening. And so that's why it's important for us to get involved, get engaged, and plug in, because now is the time where we have a very uncertain future ahead of us, no matter what happens.
Yeah, and it's just been disgusting to see all of the, this says everything about the Democratic Party, all of the women who want to get a vice presidential pick, they're all out in the media talking about it and defending Joe Biden. People like Elizabeth Warren, Gillibrand, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris.
Wait, Warren did?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, they're all enthusiastically, full-throatedly in the middle of this major scandal that's coming out, saying we 100% know Joe Biden is a great person, because they all just want power.
It's bizarre. They
just very in a shallow way want power. They probably believe the allegations. They just don't give a shit. But it's going to become, an issue for Biden because, Trump, pretty clear evidence that he's a rapist as well.
Like 25 women. No.
Right. And Trump still won among white women. That's because conservatives, the right, that's not an issue they particularly seem to care about very much, whether they believed it or not. But liberals and Democratic Party voters, a lot of them do care about that and are going to be upset by it because this is, it's not going to go away. They're able to, the official strategy in the primary was to keep Biden away from TV cameras and interviews, and they're still trying to do that with him now. But when he's officially the nominee and it's head to head, Trump and Biden, it's not going to be able to be hidden as it has been so far. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess Biden's going on Morning Joe tomorrow specifically to address the sexual assault allegation, or the sexual assault that clearly happened. Because Tara Reid, if this is a lie by Tara Reid, it's pretty elaborate because she told her closest friends and family about it in 1993 and is now saying, how often is, that's how you verify Me Too claims, is did they tell people about it at the time, especially if it's a long time ago, and those details are still almost identical. So it's going to continue, but I think what's going to happen on Morning Joe is Biden, of course, will be doing what he normally does, which is looking down and reading from a piece of paper, which I've never really see happen in cable news interviews. He's like the first guy to pioneer it. He's going to be reading something written by Simone Sanders or one of his advisors. And if Morning Joe, if their plan is just to let him read a statement and move on, then he's not going to do any more interviews about it and be like, see, I addressed it. But if they press him, it's going to be bad, because that guy... Can you imagine Biden trying to respond to being pressed, especially about something like that? I mean, he might just admit it on TV accidentally.
Right. And then you see Donald Trump Jr. and stuff already attacking this full on. I mean, you see the right-wing media machine full force putting out the Tara Reid story. And they were sitting actually on that Larry King phone call from her mother. Look, if you are just harassed, or, if you are... someone tells you some sort of sexual comment, your boss, I find it hard to believe that your mother would be outraged enough to call Larry King and kind of pose the question, like, what do I do if my daughter went through this really crazy experience and like what accountability can there be for the senator that she worked for. I just don't see that happening
There's
unless
obviously something more.
If there had to be something more than just him telling her, I like your legs. I mean, let's be honest here. But yeah, I mean, the right wing is going to use this. They're going to use it over and over again. It does not matter that Donald Trump is a rapist and that he's sexually assaulted 24 women. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They're going to use it, and they're going to use it hard. And we already see that happening. So it's pretty disturbing. I don't know what's going to happen. But yeah, Joe Biden's going to fall apart. He already is. You know, interviews that he's giving, he's just like, I shouldn't have said that. And listen, fat, I'm not sedentary. I do push-ups. It's just going to be the most surreal election probably of all time. I mean, really, it's going to make 2016 kind of pale in comparison to what this shit show is going to be unfold. We're going to wrap it up. This will only be available to $5 and up patrons in 48 hours. So please consider donating to Empire Files. Please check out our new episode on the U.S. empire, ramping up militarism and war in the wake of COVID. Is there anything that we have not addressed from Super Chat people?
No, just so you know, we are getting a lot. We really appreciate them. It's the reason we keep doing these, and we go through and we will read all of them together. So every comment that you send, we really appreciate it. We'll go over it together. Sorry you couldn't answer some of the questions here, but definitely appreciate you.
Yeah, we appreciate you. We'll try to address some of those questions in the next live stream. But thank you so much. We know it's a really difficult time for everyone. We hope you're staying sane. We hope you're doing well. Please link up with local organizations to find out how you can get involved in the grassroots struggle, the protests that are going on, and just keep active and don't get demoralized about what's going on right now. We're all in this together. And that's really true. We are definitely all in this together. So yeah, we'll see what happens with the next election. Thank you for tuning in. Check out our store, empirefiles.store. Check out Gaza Fights for Freedom. We have a lockdown code that you can get 50% off rentals right now if you put lockdown in the checkout. So check that out on Vimeo. And yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Bye.